What if a single decision, made in a quiet room in London, held the fate of millions in its balance? What if one man's calm under pressure determined whether the Allied invasion of Europe would succeed or be wiped out at the shoreline? The D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, were more than a military operation. They were the culmination of years of planning, risk, and sheer will. At the center stood Dwight D. Eisenhower, a general who transformed doubt into determination, strategy into action, and uncertainty into victory. Tonight we dive into Eisenhower's journey, not just as a soldier, but as the architect of one of history's most audacious campaigns. We will unravel how he navigated conflicting advice, unpredictable weather, and enormous stakes. We will examine how his leadership shaped the course of the Second World War. This wasn't just about landing on a beach, it was about liberating a continent, and if it had failed, the cost would have been unimaginable. Welcome, I'm Knightley. In this documentary action journey, we will trace Eisenhower's path from officer to the mastermind of D-Day. We'll explore his bold decisions, his fears, his triumphs, and the moment when the world changed. Stay with me, because missing what comes next means missing how this single man helped turn the tide of World War II. Let's begin. It is early 1944. Europe has been under the shadow of war for almost 5 years. Nazi Germany holds large swathes of the continent. The Soviet Union bleeds on the Eastern Front. Britain endures constant threat of air raids. The United States, having entered the war, is pushing for a decisive strike to open a second front. In Washington and London, Allied leaders agree. A massive crossing of the English Channel is necessary. The key players include the United States, Great Britain, Canada, and other Allied nations. A raid against the German Wehrmacht and its allies. Adolf Hitler's regime has fortified the French coastline with bunkers, obstacles, and gun emplacements. The Atlantic Wall stretches for hundreds of miles. On the ground, German divisions, some inexperienced, others battle-hardened, await an invasion. At stake is nothing less than the liberation of Western Europe, which is huge. If the Allies stumble, Germany could really dig in its heels and tighten its grip on the region. Imagine their forces regrouping and pushing back even further into 1944 and beyond. Yikes. But if the Allies pull this off, they could carve a path straight into France, putting serious pressure on Germany's western border. That would force Hitler to juggle a two-front war, which is no easy feat. Picture the chaos that could unfold if the Allies succeed. It's a game-changer for the whole continent. For the Allied command, delaying could mean losing momentum. For Germany, repelling the invasion would preserve the balance of power. Meanwhile, the war has reached a critical phase. The Soviets are pressing from the east, reclaiming lost territory. In North Africa and Italy, Allied forces have already achieved success, but mainland Europe remains sealed. The Allies know that time is not on their side. Hitler's forces are formidable but stretched thin. The Allies must strike decisively, and soon. Into this fraught backdrop steps Dwight D. Eisenhower, chosen to lead the invasion. He must contend not only with the physical dangers of war, but with political rivalries, logistical nightmares, and the burden of command. The fate of millions rests in his hands. The Channel crossing, if executed well, could break Hitler's grip. If botched, it could be a catastrophe. And so the stage is set, a momentous gambit with everything to gain and everything to lose. The storm is gathering on the horizon. To prepare for D-Day, Allied commanders devised a plan of unprecedented scale. Their goal, land multiple divisions on 5 Normandy beaches simultaneously, establish a lodgment, and expand inland. They broke the German defenses through a combination of deception, intelligence, and sheer firepower. The strategy hinged on coordination, air, sea, and land forces working in harmony. At the top stood Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. He worked closely with British General Bernard Montgomery, the architect of ground forces, and US General Omar Bradley, tasked with leading the American armies. Behind them, Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay directed naval operations, while Air Chief Marshal Sir Trafford Leigh-Mallory oversaw the massive air armada. The Allies also launched Operation Bodyguard, a deception campaign to mislead the Germans about the location and timing of the invasion. Fake armies, dummy equipment, and false radio traffic suggested an attack at Pas-de-Calais. Meanwhile, intelligence services intercepted German communications, assessed enemy strength and monitored fortifications along the coast. On the technology front, the Allies relied on landing craft, tanks, gliders and paratroopers. The Higgins boats would carry troops ashore under fire. Specialized vehicles called DD tanks floated on the sea before rolling off into battle. Gliders hauled reinforcements behind enemy lines, while transport planes dropped airborne troops in darkness. Artillery and naval gunfire would soften enemy defenses, while bombers struck inland, clearing the way. Logistics posed an enormous challenge. Supplies, reinforcements and fuel had to cross the channel. Engineers labored to build temporary harbors, mulberry harbors, to offload men and material on the beaches. Fuel pipelines under the sea, known as Pluto, pipeline under the ocean, were planned to sustain the advance once the foothold was secured. The human cost of preparation was huge. Training camps across Britain, war rooms in London, air bases, ports, all hummed with activity. Troops practiced landings, rehearsed in mock beaches, launched gliders, and prepared for every contingency. Eisenhower convened councils of war, weighed the latest weather reports, and consulted with his staff. He knew that success required not just force, but patience, intelligence, and adaptability. As June approached, tension mounted. Bad weather threatened to delay the invasion. The Germans remained alert. Every decision carried weight. Eisenhower, calm yet resolute, weighed his options. He faced pressure. Political leaders, generals, and troops pinned their hopes on him. A wrong call now could mean disaster. And yet, he believed the time was right. The storm was about to begin. On the night of June 5 to June 6, 1944, the invasion began. Under cover of darkness, thousands of aircraft and gliders crossed the channel. Paratroopers from the U.S. 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions leapt into Normandy's countryside. They landed behind enemy lines to secure bridges, disrupt communications and seize key positions. As dawn broke, the seaborne invasion commenced. Hundreds of naval vessels pushed toward the coast. Landing craft carrying infantry approached under the rising sun. The beaches, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno and Sword, awaited. On board, troops braced for the unknown. The horizon was a mix of sky and sea, lit by the first rays of light, tinged with the terrible quiet before the storm. At Utah Beach, American forces encountered lighter resistance, advancing more quickly inland. But at Omaha, the situation was far more difficult. Strong German defenses, steep cliffs and rough seas slowed the assault. Men climbed obstacles, scaled cliffs, and advanced under fire. Behind them, naval guns and bombers pounded enemy positions to soften the defense. Meanwhile, at Golden Juno beaches, British and Canadian troops landed. They advanced through obstacles, cleared minefields, and pushed inland. Glider-borne reinforcements joined the action, reinforcing fragile footholds. On Sword Beach, units rushed to connect with airborne forces, creating a bridge between the shore and the interior. Coordination was critical. Naval fire support proved essential. Battleships and destroyers opened fire to neutralize bunkers and artillery. Air support continued. Low-flying fighters strafed positions, bombers targeted known fortifications, and transport aircraft supplied troops. The air-sea-land coordination was a marvel, a complex ballet under fire. German commanders reacted quickly. They deployed reserves, relocated armored units, and attempted counterattacks. Some units fought stubbornly. Others were confused by Allied deceptions. Communications broke down. The Allies exploited weaknesses, pushing forward where the defense was vulnerable. On the beaches, momentum was uneven. Some units advanced smoothly, others struggled. Men climbed cliffs, cleared obstacles, and linked up with neighboring forces. The sky roared with aircraft. The sea trembled under the weight of ships. The ground shook with every explosion. The battle was fierce but carefully managed. By midday, Allied forces had established footholds across several beaches. Engineers landed to begin building the mulberry harbors. Supply vessels started unloading. Troops consolidated their gains and prepared for an inland advance. But the fight was far from over. The defenses of Normandy still loomed, and German armored divisions were alert. The clash had begun in earnest, and many hours of danger lay ahead. Eisenhower, watching from his headquarters, monitored reports from the front. Sometimes the information was confusing or delayed, yet he remained focused. He knew that every minute counted. The beaches were not secure yet. The skies, the sea, and the ground remained contested. But a foothold was forming. The gamble was paying off, but the storm was not yet tamed. As the day wore on, the decisive moment came into focus. At Omaha Beach, the tide turned when reinforcements arrived, combined with more effective naval gunfire and armored support. The arrival of Sherman tanks, floating off DD tanks, gave the infantry the firepower they desperately needed. These armored units crushed bunkers and forced German positions to yield. Meanwhile, airborne units secured vital bridges and crossroads. The capture of points like Sainte-Mère-Église prevented German units from cutting off the beachhead. Communications improved. Allied leaders on the ground coordinated follow-on forces. Supplies, once delayed, began to flow. Engineers established beach exits. Paths were cleared through obstacles. The momentum shifted. Another crucial factor: weather. The early morning winds and rough seas had threatened the landings, but by midday the conditions stabilized. This gave naval and air assets better firing angles, allowed landing craft to bring in reinforcements, and lowered the risk of catastrophic losses. The timing was almost miraculous. Yet perhaps the most important ingredient was leadership. Eisenhower's calm direction, his willingness to adapt, and his trust in subordinate commanders ensured that even when things went wrong, they could be corrected. He had prepared for failures, planned contingencies, and created redundancies. When the moment came, that preparation paid off. A historian observing later said, "Eisenhower's skill lay not just in boldness but in patience. He understood that success depended not on a single stroke, but on a web of coordinated efforts, and he trusted his commanders to act when called upon." That assessment captures how the turning point was not a lucky break but the predictable result of planning, leadership, and adaptability. By evening, the beachheads were secure enough for the Allies to commit to further operations. The Germans, shaken by the scale and coordination of the assault, struggled to mount effective counterattacks. Their reserves were disoriented, their communications fractured. The tide had officially turned. After this moment, nothing would be the same. After D-Day, the Allies began transforming their tenuous foothold into a solid base for further operations inside France. The Mulberry harbors became operational, enabling thousands of tons of supplies to land daily. Pluto began pumping fuel across the channel. Engineers and logistics units worked relentlessly to maintain the flow. German forces suffered both materially and morally. Massive casualties, disrupted command structures, and the shock of being outflanked weakened their ability to resist. While exact numbers vary, estimates suggest tens of thousands of German soldiers were lost or captured in the early phase. The Allied losses were also heavy. Infantry, ships, and aircraft were lost, but they held the ground. More importantly, the morale of the Allied armies soared. Soldiers who had trained for years were now advancing inland. Civilians under occupation saw hope for liberation. Political leaders in Washington and London recognized that the gamble had paid off. The operation gave the Allies a platform to push deeper into Europe. It changed the strategic calculus. The push from Normandy forced German high command to redeploy divisions to contain the beachhead. Hitler, late to react, committed armored units, but often too late or in piecemeal fashion. The once impregnable Atlantic wall began to crack. As Allied troops advanced, towns were liberated, supply lines extended, and fresh offensives planned. D-Day also opened the road to Paris and beyond. Within weeks, Allied forces would break out of Normandy, sweep across northern France, and press into Germany. The establishment of a Western Front relieved some pressure on the Eastern Front. Coordination with Soviet advances intensified. The war would accelerate toward its conclusion. The human price was immense. Thousands of men died or were wounded. Families on both sides suffered. But the cost was matched by the scale of the achievement. A turning point in the war, a symbol of unity among nations, and proof that ambition, planning, and leadership could alter history. The price of victory was high, but the alternative would have been far greater. In the aftermath, Eisenhower's role was recognized globally. He emerged not just as a military leader, but as a statesman in the making. The D-Day success elevated his reputation, and it played a part in shaping his future. For the Allies, the beachhead in Normandy was the beginning of the end, and the beginning of liberation. Historians argue that Eisenhower's greatest strength was his ability to balance boldness with pragmatism. He was not reckless, but he was willing to take calculated risks. His leadership style emphasized delegation, trust, and consultation. He assembled a strong team, empowered his subordinates, and listened to dissenting voices. Strategists reflect that Operation Overlord succeeded because of the integrated use of air, sea, and land forces. The Allies did not simply rely on overwhelming firepower. They coordinated intelligence, deception, logistics, and engineering. It was as much a logistical and planning achievement as a combat one. Veteran testimonies, dramatized by witnesses, note Eisenhower's calm presence. In briefing rooms, his decisions were delivered with clarity. In moments of crisis, his voice remained steady. He understood that his role was not merely to command, but to reassure. His optimism inspired confidence. His humility fostered loyalty. Analysts also highlight the value of contingency planning. Eisenhower prepared for failure as much as success. He had plans to delay, to postpone, and to adapt. That foresight meant when things went wrong, weather, mislandings, confusion, there was room to recover. Beyond tactics, D-Day offers lessons about leadership under pressure. Great leaders recognize that success is not guaranteed, that risk is inherent, and that preparation must be paired with flexibility. Eisenhower embodied this. He weighed the risks, made the call, and trusted his team. He showed that leadership is not dominance but stewardship. Finally, the impact of his leadership extended beyond the battlefield. After the war, Eisenhower carried the same qualities into diplomacy and governance. His ability to unite allies, to plan strategically, and to manage complex systems would define his later political career. The lessons of D-Day helped define not only a military victory, but a generation of leadership. So what if one decision made in London changed the fate of millions? Eisenhower's gamble at Normandy did more than open a beachhead. He opened a path to freedom. What followed was not just military victory, but the beginning of Europe's liberation. His calm under pressure, his planning, and his trust in others shaped one of history's most defining moments. Thank you for joining me. I'm Knightley. If you found this story compelling, please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us what part surprised you, his leadership, the planning, or the risk. And if you want more, stay tuned. Next time we'll explore Patton, the US tank commander, his rise, his controversies, and his role in the Allied push across Europe. See you in the next video.